Hey there, how's it going everyone? This is part 1 of a series of videos in which I'm going to be coding a full stack web application using the Flask framework and ReactJS on the front end. So if you're a beginner and you'd like to know how to use Flask with the front end, like with React or with Vue, chances are high that you're going to pick so much knowledge out of this video. And if you're new to this channel, please go ahead and subscribe. And don't forget to like this video and comment what you think about it. So without further ado, we are going to get started. So I'm going to get started by building the back end of this project. I'm going to build a REST API that's going to serve JSON data to the front end, and then we are going to be building the front end with React. So without further ado, let me get started. So within my folder, I'm going to create a folder which I'm going to call the backend. And then in the backend folder is where I'm going to write all the code, as well as to create the virtual environment and everything that will be specific to the backend. So to do that, I'm going to open up a terminal and I'll cd into backend. If you do note, this time I'm not using Windows, I'm using Ubuntu. So I'm going to create a virtual environment by saying pip env. I'm going to install. Actually, I'll just first create a virtual environment by saying pip env shell. Then this is going to create our virtual environment within this folder. So when you open up this folder, we are going to have a pip file. So this has created a virtual environment within this folder. So I'll try to check for the Python version, and you have Python 3.9.5. I'm going to install the required dependencies for this project. So you're going to run pip install. Actually, this is pip env install. So I'm going to install Flask. I'm going to install Flask RESTX as the framework I'm going to be using to create our API. I'm also going to install Flask SQL Alchemy, as it's going to help me to create models for our database. I'm going to install Flask JWT extended. So this is going to be extended to help us to create JWTs and help us during authentication. So I'll also import let's see, Flask RESTX, Flask SQL Alchemy. Let me correct this. It's going to be SQL Alchemy, Flask JWT extended. And let's install this for now. So I'm going to run this. And this is going to install the required dependencies within our folder. Now that our dependencies have been installed, the next thing is going to be to create our API. So to do that, I'm going to go up within our backend folder and create a new file, which I'm going to call config. So this is going to be config.py. Now this config.py file is the one that's going to have all our configurations for the API. So I'm going to put it just inside here within our backend folder, and within this I'm going to create our configurations for our application. So for now, I am going to create a class, and I'm going to call this class config. So this is going to have our global configuration. So the first configuration I'll add to this file is going to be a secret key. So I'm going to use Python decouple to locate this within an env file. So I'm going to install Python decouple. I'll come here and say pip env install Python decouple. So this is going to install Python decouple within our virtual environment. Now after this is installed, I'll locate our secret key. So I'm going to come to the top of the code and then say from decouple import config. Correct something here. It's going to be from decouple. I'm going to import config. And after doing this, now I'm going to locate our secret key. So I'm going to say config, and then this is going to get our secret key. So after this, I'm going to create that env file. So I'll say within our backend folder, I'll just come and create a new file and then say .env. So this is going to be our env file. Let me rename it. So it's going to be .env. Now within our .env file, I'm going to create our secret key. So I'll say secret key, and then our secret key is going to be a random string. So to generate that random string, I'm going to make use of Python secret. So I'm going to open up our terminal and say Python. So this is going to be import secrets. So now after importing secrets, I am going to generate a random hexadecimal string by saying secrets. So this is going to be secrets dot token hex, then I'll specify 12. So this is going to generate this random hexadecimal string. I'll copy it and then simply paste it within our .env. So I may remove this. So it's going to be that string. After doing that, I'll exit out of the terminal. Now I'm going to come within our config.py and set another configuration variable. So I will set the SQL Alchemy echo to true for our development, and I'm going to set it to false in our production as well as in other configurations. So to do that, I'm going to set our SQL Alchemy echo. Actually, let me not set it from here. What I'll do is to actually set the SQL Alchemy track modifications as a global configuration, since we do not want to see those modification warnings. So I'll say track modifications is going to be equal to false. You can even put this within our .env file. So I can say config that, then since it's going to be a boolean, I can cast it by saying cast is equal to bool. So I can come within our .env file and simply, so I'll copy this, actually copy it, I'm going to undo that. So I'm just going to copy this, then paste it within our .env file. So I'll come and say is equal to, then this is going to be false. So the couple will read this and then cast it to a boolean, just like you see here. So after that, I am going to create a development config. So I'll create a development config by saying class dev config. So our dev config is going to inherit from the global config, and then here we are going to set the specific configurations for our development. So I'm going to set the SQL Alchemy database URI. So this will be our database URI. The database URI is going to be that URI of the database we are going to use, or the connection string of the database we are going to use. In this case, I am going to use an SQLite database since it's easy to set up. However, you can also use Postgres. It's not that hard to set up. So I'm going to start with SQL Alchemy database URI. So I'm going to set the string for connecting with SQLite. So I'm going to come and going to import OS, and I'm going to create a variable. So I'm going to say base dar is going to be equal to os.path. So this is going to be the DAR name. So I'll get the DAR name of the current file. So this is going to be os.path.real path. So it's going to be the real path to the file, which means we are getting the directory name, which is backend, and then we're going to concatenate this backend, this path of the backend folder to the name of the database file we want to create. So to do that, I'm going to come and say it's going to be SQLite, and then I'm going to add os.path.join. So this is going to join the base dar as well as the file we want to create. So I'm going to create this file and may call it dev.db. So after doing this, the next thing I will want is to set the debug variable to true. This is when we are developing, as this is going to help us to be able to access exceptions on a front end as well as to see every error that we have, as well as run our server with reloading. So another setting I may take care of is we have the SQL Alchemy Echo, and what this is going to help us is to see the generated SQL commands every time we carry out a database transaction. So I'll say SQL Alchemy Echo is equal to true. This is when we are developing. So for now, I may set the rest to simply empty classes. So I may say def CRUD config. So it's going to also inherit from config. Now I may say pass because this is going to be empty for now. I may do the same thing for our test config. So I say test config. So this is going to be pass for now. So I've created the different configurations we're going to be using for our backend. Now we are going to majorly concentrate on using our development config, which is our dev config. So I'm going to create our simple file that's going to set up our application. So to do that, I'm going to come and then create a new file. So I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this file our main.py. We're going to put it within our backend. We're going to move it. So this main.py is the one that's going to have our entire application. So to do that, I'm going to come and say from Flask, because we are going to create our Flask instance within this file. I'm going to import the Flask class and then create the app instance. So this is going to be Flask name, and then I'll also import Flask REST text. So because it's a framework we're going to use to build our API, as it's going to provide us very easy ways of creating the different routes and creating the different CRUD routes. So to do that, I'm going to come and say from Flask REST text, I am going to import the API class as well as the resource class. Now after this, I am going to come and create an instance of the API class, and then specify that the app to this API class is going to be our current app. I'll also specify the doc. So this doc is going to be equal to the URL to which we want our doc. So I'll say this is going to be /doc, so that when we navigate to our API /docs, we can be able to see the Swagger documentation of our API, as we're going to see in a second. So I'm going to also come and create our first route. So I'm going to come and say at API.route. So within here, we are going to create our /hello route, and this is going to have a class which is going to define all the various routes, all the methods that we are going to carry out on this specific route. So I'm going to create a class. I'm going to call it hello resource, and it's also going to inherit from the resource class. And after doing this, I'll specify a get method. So this is going to be get self, and after this we shall just return a simple message of hello world. So I'm going to write a dictionary here. It's going to have a message, and the value of that message is going to be hello world. So I'm going to save this and run our server. So I'll just come right here, and if name is equal to main, I'll simply run our app. So I'll say app.run. However, we forgot one really important thing, and that is to set our configurations. So I'm going to come to the top of our code and then say from config, we are going to import our dev config, since that's what we're going to use for our development. So I'm going to import the dev config and then come and set our app to work with the dev config. So to do that, I'm going to come and say app.config. So this is going to be .config.from object. Since we are going to inherit our configurations from our class, I'm going to use .from object, and then we shall pass in our dev config. Now that hoping everything is working fine, we are going to pull up the terminal and then run our API. So I'm going to pull up the terminal, and then I am going to say Python. It's going to be our main.py, So we're seeing that our secret key is not found, so we need to declare it as an env. So where's the mistake? We declared it, so let's try to see. So this is supposed to be secret key. So when we fix this, we hope our server is going to run. So when I come and say python main.py, we see that our app is now running at localhost 5000. So when we open up this URL, it opens up in the browser and we don't see anything. However, just like we specified within our main.py that our docs URL is /docs. So when I go to our API, I can say /docs, and then it brings us to the Swagger documentation of our API. So we can be able to see that we have our route hello, and when you try this out, we execute, we see that it's going to bring a simple message of hello world. So I've been using Swagger documentation for now, but I'm going to stop using it for now, and I'm going to turn to Insomnia as my testing tool. So to do that, I am going to just navigate to my Insomnia right here. It's the testing tool I use for testing my APIs. So I'm going to create a new request, and then this request I'm going to call it let's say the hello request. So it's going to be a get request. I can specify the method from here. So I'll say create. So I'm going to carry this. So I'm going to send this request to localhost. It's going to be 5000, and this is going to be /hello. So when I send this request, we get our message hello world. So right now we've successfully created our first API endpoint. Now the next thing is going to be to create our database model, and then creating a serializer that's going to expose this data from our database in a way that we shall be able to understand and make use of while coding our front-end application. So to do that, I am going to come back to our code within VS Code. So I'm going to minimize this. So the next thing we're going to do is to create a database model that's going to kind of model our data in the database. So to do that, I'm going to come within our backend folder. I'm going to create a new file which is going to be called models.py. So let me rename this. This is going to be models.py. Now this file is going to have our models. So I'm going to create our models within this file. So it's going to be they're going to be SQL Alchemy models. So I'll come and say from, this is going to be from Flask. SQL Alchemy. So this is going to be from Flask SQL Alchemy. We are going to import SQL Alchemy. However, I can even avoid these relative imports by coming and then creating a new file which I may call exts.py, and then within this exts file I may just come and say from Flask SQL Alchemy. I'm going to import the SQL Alchemy class. So it's going to be a SQL Alchemy class. Now after doing this, the next thing is going to be to create a DB instance. So I'm going to say DB is equal to SQL Alchemy and then specify the app. So in this case, I may not specify it because I want it to be a global variable that I can be able to access within other parts of our code. So I'm going to leave it like this for now, then come back to our models. So I may say from exts, I'm going to import the DB instance, and it is from this DB instance that I'm going to create our model. So I'm going to create our model. So let me first model that out. So I'm going to create our class of recipe. So our recipe class is going to have an ID which is going to be an int, and this is going to be our primary key. And we're also going to have a title. So our title is going to be a string, and then we are going to have our description. So I'm going to also create a description. So this description is going to also be a string. In this case, it's going to be text. So let's specify that this is going to be text. And after creating this, we may also add a date added field. So this is going to be a date added field, or we may even leave it out. Let's just keep it simple for now. So right now we are having our class that's going to be modeled like this. So let's go ahead and model this. So I'll come just down here and say class. So this is going to be our class of recipe, and it's going to inherit from db.model. Now after doing this, the next thing is going to be to create our ID. So our ID is going to be equal to db.integer, and it's going to be db.column and then db.integer, and then we specify that our primary key is going to be equal to true. So let me fix this. This is going to be primary key is equal to true. So we're going to also create our title field. So I'm going to say title is going to be db.column, db.string, and then we can specify that nullable is going to be false. If you're wondering where this auto-completion is coming from, I'm using an AI tool called tab9 that's helping me to do this. So I'm going to also add a description. So our description in this case is going to be equal to db.column. This is going to be db.text, and we can also say nullable is going to be false. So we're going to create some convenience methods that are going to help us to create the CRUD operations onto our recipe model class. So to do this, let me first close this. So I'm going to come right here. So the first method I'm going to create is one that's going to help us to return string representation of objects that we shall create from this class. So I'm going to say def, this is going to be our repre method. So it's going to work on the current object self, and then what it will return is just an f string. So this f string is just going to have the recipe and then the title of that recipe. So we can say self.title. Let me remove the description. So it's going to just return the title of the recipe. Now after doing this, the next thing is going to be to create different we're going to just create different methods that are going to help us to do the CRUD operations. So the first method I'm going to create is one that's going to create. So I'm just going to call it save. Then it's going to work on the current object. We shall call this method on. So what it shall do is to just add it to the database session. So it will be db.session.add, and then we shall add the current object. Now the next thing will be to commit this to the database. So I'm going to do db.session.commit, and once we do this, the next thing is going to be to create one that's going to delete. So I may say def, this is going to be delete self. So now it's not going to be so different from the previous method. However, what it's going to do is to actually just delete this from the database. So this is going to be db.session.delete self, and then db.session.commit. Now after we've done this, the next thing is going to be to create an update method. So this will be a method that's going to update the current object self. Now after that, this method also will take in information of fields such as the title and the description. Now this will just set those fields to the title and the description it has got. So we shall say self.title will be equal to the title we pass in. Then it's going to also have self.description being equal to the description that we get. So this is going to be description. Now after we've done this, the next thing is going to be to expose this model via a serializer on our API. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to our main.py file. So I'm going to call what they call a context processor. That's going to help us to access our model as well as the DB instance within our terminal. So to do that, I'm going to come and first import those. So I'm going to say from models, I'm going to import our recipe class. So this is going to be our recipe class, and then from exts, I'm going to import our DB instance. Now after importing this DB instance, the next thing is going to be to expose this via a terminal shell, so that's to help us to interact with our database objects. So to do that, I'm just going to come and say add app.shell. So this is going to be actually app.shell context processor. So I'm going to define, sorry for this, so I'll just come right here and then decorate a function which I'll call the make shell context. And then what this function is going to do is to just return a dictionary. So we're going to create a dictionary with a key of db, and then the value is going to be the db instance. And then we shall also expose our, so this is going to be our recipe, so I'll say recipe, and then I'll also say recipe right here. Then after, it's going to just return this. So if I save this and go back to our terminal, so I can stop this, this server, and the next thing I may do is to just export our Flask app as the main.py file we are working in. And then the next thing we shall do is to just be able to create our database. So to do that, I'm just going to simply come here and say export Flask app as main.py, and then I can do Flask shell. So this is going to open up a Python shell that's going to help us to interact with our app. And after I've done this, I'll just simply come and say db. So this is going to, so we see that we are having a problem here. The SQL Alchemy extension was not registered to the current application. So let's first work on this. So I'm going to first stop this and come right here. So we created our db instance, but we did not register it with our application. So we're going to take care of that by coming right here. After configuring our app, we shall just say db.init app, then we pass in our app. So this is going to register SQL Alchemy to work with our current application. So I'm going to save this, and after saving, I'm going to come to our terminal and then repeat the commands that we carried out. So I'm going to say export the Flask app as our main.py. Oh, I'm in the wrong folder, so I'll cd into backend, and then I'll say export our Flask app. So this is going to be our Flask app, and in this case we're going to expose it as main.py. So after exposing it as main.py, the next thing is going to be to run the Flask shell. So I'll say Flask shell. So this is going to open up. So we are working outside our virtual environment, forgive me for this, so I'll simply activate it. So I'll say pip env shell, because I'm using pip env, sorry for this. So this is going to activate the virtual environment in which I'm working in. So after that, we shall just export our app as that, then say Flask shell. Then this is going to open up our Python shell. So within here, I will access db, and then it shows us the SQL Alchemy object that shows us the connection string to our database. Now we can also access the recipe model, so I'll say recipe, and this is going to show us our recipe model. Now let's go ahead and create our database by running a simple command. So I'll just say db.create all. Now, hoping that everything is running fine, we expect that this command is going to run, and it's going to show us the SQL that's generated by that. So I'm going to run this, and we see that it's going to create our table that's modeled from our models. So let's try to look at this. We have an ID, which is an integer, and the primary key, which is not null. We have a title, that's a column, and a string, and it's not nullable. We have a description that is a text and not nullable, just like we described in our models. So I'm going to close this. Now the next thing is going to be to create a serializer using Flask REST X that's going to help us to serialize this model and be able to return responses out of this model. So to do that, I am going to close my terminal. Actually, let me first start my server. So I'm going to say python main.py. So this is going to run our Python server, and I'm going to close the terminal for now. So I'm going to go back to main.py. Now, just like you saw, we created our first resource or our class that has the different methods, and in this case we created a simple hello resource. So let's go ahead and create the different resource classes that are going to work with our model. So before we do that, I'm going to create a serializer that's going to help us to serialize our model into JSON format or data that we can use on the front end. So to do that, I'm going to come right here after the API instance and then say our recipe model. So our recipe model is going to be equal to API.model. So within this, we can be able to create a model that's going to serialize a class, and we can specify the different fields as our model states. So we are going to import these fields from Flask REST-X. So you need to come here from Flask REST-X, and I'm going to import fields. And after doing that, I'm going to come on our recipe model. So I'm going to come and specify the name of the model, so I'll call it recipe, and then specify a dictionary containing the various fields. So the first field is going to be our ID, which is going to be an integer, so I'll say fields dot, it's going to be, sorry for this, it's going to be an integer. Now after doing this, we are going to specify the next field. So the next field is going to be a title, so we can specify that this is going to be a string. And the next thing, we are going to specify that our description is going to be equal to fields dot string. It's also going to be a string. And after doing this, this is going to be our model. So it's going to be our model or the serializer that's going to help us to marshal or to serialize or to expose our model in terms of JSON. So after doing this, I'm going to simply come right down here. So I'm going to create the different resource classes that are going to help us to access the different methods that we're going to carry out. So I'm going to first create a route. So I'm going to say at API.route, and now I'm going to create a route that I'm going to call recipes. So after creating this route, I'm going to write a resource class, and it's going to have the different methods that are going to fall within this URL. So to do that, I'm going to call this class. This is going to be our recipes. I'm going to call it recipes resource class, since I don't want it to collide with our recipe class. So I need to call this recipe resource, and it's going to inherit from resource. Now after doing this, the next thing is going to be to create the various methods, the various HTTP methods. So I'm going to come here, just like you see here. I wanted to maximize this to show you guys clearly. So I'm going to create a first method. The first method is going to be get, and it's going to be returning a list of recipes. So I'm going to just give it a doc string here, and then it's going to be get all recipes. So this is going to be getting all recipes from our database. So I'll pass this for now. So I'm going to pass, and then when I come, I also create a method which is going to be the post method. Now this is going to be responsible for creating a recipe. So I'll add the doc string. So this is going to be create a new recipe. Now after this is done, I also pass. And after doing this, the next thing is going to be to create a route that's going to help us to do the delete, the update, and to get one specific recipe. So to do this, I'm going to come and create another route. So this is going to be API.route. Let me correct this. It's going to be API.route. So in this case, we want to get a recipe by its ID. So this is going to be recipe / and then we shall specify that we want a recipe by its ID, which is going to be an integer. Then after this, I'm going to create our resource class. So I'll say class. This is going to be our recipe resource. So I'll call it recipe resource. Keep in mind that I call this recipes resource. So I'm going to call this recipe resource, and it's going to also inherit from resource. And after this is done, the next thing is to create the various methods. So I'm going to say def get self, and then I'll pass in the ID, since it's to access a route with a specific, it's to access that resource with a specific ID. So to do this, I'm going to come and give it a docstring. So this is going to be get a recipe by ID, and then I'll pass it for now. So I'm going to create the update method. So this is going to be put self, then the ID. So right here, I'll just say update recipe. So I'm going to correct this, so by adding one extra quotation. So I'm going to come right here and say pass. So this is going to be the update method, and then for the delete method, I'll just come and say def delete self, then ID. Then I'll also do the same thing. So it's going to be deleting by ID. So I'll pass. Now we have our various routes. The next thing is going to be to expose our model to via these routes using our serializer. So to do this, we are going to use a specific decorator, as we're going to see. So I'm going to first deal with the route that's going to return all recipes. So I need to go up within our code, and I'm going to first query for all recipes from the database and then return them as a list of recipes. So to do that, I'm going to make use of the recipe model that we've created here. So Flask REST X does this by using a decorator called at api.marshal_with. If you want to marshal one object, and at api.marshal_list_with if you want to marshal a list of objects. So let's try to query for all recipes from our database. So to do that, I'm going to say recipes is going to be equal to a list of recipes. So in this case, we may say recipe, our recipe model dot query, then dot all. So this returns a list of recipes. Now after returning a list of recipes, let me remove the pass statement. So I'll come and instead return that list. So I'll say return recipes. But you understand that this is an object or a query set from SQL Alchemy. So instead of returning JSON, this is going to return an SQL Alchemy object. So to turn this SQL Alchemy object into JSON that you can understand on the front end, we are going to make use of our serializer or our model that we created right here. So to do that, I'm going to decorate this method or this function with our serializer. So I need to say at API dot marshal. So this is going to be list with, since we are going to return a list of recipes, and then I'll specify our model. So this is going to be the recipe model. And after this, the next thing is going to be to just test this route. So I'm going to save, hoping that our server is running. I'm going to come and it's still running. So I'm going to close this and go back to Insomnia. So I'm going to create a new request. It's going to be a get request. So this is going to be get all recipes. So if I say get, I'm going to create this and then I'll send it to localhost. It's going to be 5000/recipes. So if I send this, we expect to get a blank list of recipes. Now, if you're observant, we returned a query set of recipes, and this is going to return nothing or an empty list because we haven't yet populated that database with any data. So let's go ahead and create a new recipe using our model. So I'm going to go to this method, the one for post, that's going to create a new recipe. So I'm going to come, and the first thing we shall do is to access data from our JSON, accessing data that's coming from any client. So to do this, I'm going to make use of the request object from Flask. So we're going to go up within our code and say from Flask, I'm going to import our request object. So the request object is an object that's going to contain the body as well as the headers and any other data that may come from the front end. So I'm going to come and have to access this data through the request object. So I'm going to create a variable which I'm going to call data. So I'm going to come right here and then say that data is going to be equal to request dot get JSON. So this get JSON method is going to help us to be able to acquire the data that comes from the request from any client that we may send this data from. So we are going to access the different fields of the data or the JSON, and then be able to create a new recipe object out of that, which we shall save in our database. So let's go ahead and create a new recipe. So I'm going to say new recipe is going to be equal to a recipe object. Now this is going to be a new recipe object, and we shall specify that the title is going to be equal to the data, the field of the title as got from the JSON. So this will be data.get title, and then the next thing is going to be the description. So I'll say description is going to be equal to data.get description. Now remember, we created our convenience methods like the .save methods, which is going to save this to the database. So I'll just come within our main.py and say new recipe dot save. Now this is just enough to save this to the database. Now remember, we are using a serializer to help us to return responses or to serialize our model and return to us JSON. So what I'm going to do is to come and also decorate this method. So I'll just come and say at, it's going to be API dot measure width. So if you're observant, when I'm returning one object, I use measure width, and when I'm returning a list of objects, I instead say at API dot measure list width. So in this case, I'm returning only one object, which is the current new recipe we've created. So I'll say measure with the recipe model, and then simply return the recipe model. So I'll just say to return the recipe object. So I'll say new recipe. Now we can also return the status code, that is the response status code. So I can come and just say 201, which is the created response code or the created status code. Now after doing this, we are going to test this. I'm going to save this, and after saving this, I'm going to simply come to my insomnia, create a new request, and calling this create a new recipe. So this is going to be a new recipe. Now I'm going to specify the method as a post method, and I'm also going to give it a body. So I'm going to create this and come to the body. Now I want to give this body as JSON. So I'll come and create a JSON object. So this is going to be our title. So our title, let's say milk, biscuit. So just add anything, blah blah blah, and then within our description, I'll just add blah blah blah. So this is how to make them. So if I send this, we expect that it's going to return our response in terms of JSON and the status code of 201. So I'm going to send this. So we are not having our URL, so let me add the URL. So this is going to be our localhost 5000/recipes. So I'm going to send this, and we see that our object has been created, or our data has been created, and it has returned our status code of 201. So if I magnify this, I'm going to make this large so that you can be able to see it. So we are having our status code of 201 created. So even if we query all the recipes, we can be able to get our newly created object. So after doing that, the next thing is going to be to cater for the routes of getting an individual recipe, updating a recipe, as well as deleting a recipe. Then we need to come to our Visual Studio Code, and then within our recipe resource class, and we first take care of that specific this specific route that's going to help us to get our recipe by its ID. So the first thing is going to be to query for the recipe from the database. So I'll say recipe is going to be equal to recipe dot query dot get. I also say O404, then I pass in the ID. So what this query is doing is to actually search for the object that has this ID and return a 404 response status code if it's not found. So after doing this, we shall just return it. So I'll just say return recipe, and after returning this recipe, I'll have to return it as JSON. So I'm going to decorate this with at API dot, it's going to be marshal with. So I'm going to specify that we are going to marshal with the recipe model. Now after doing this, I'm going to come and try to test this route. So we need to say we need to go back to our Insomnia. I'm going to create a new request, which is going to be get a recipe. So this is going to be getting a recipe. It's going to be a get request. We're going to create this request and then come to localhost. It's going to be 5000/recipe, and then I'll specify the ID /1. So if I send this, we see that our object has been returned. So now we are going to take care of that route that's going to help us to update a specific recipe. So I'm going to go back this side and then come to the put method. I'm going to remove this pass statement, and then I'm going to first query for that specific recipe we would like to update. So I'm going to say recipe to update. So this is going to be a recipe to update. It's going to be equal to our recipe, then dot our query dot filter. Then in this case, I'm going to say we want to actually just get it. We are not going to use a filter, so I will say get 0404, just like we did for the previous method. So I'll say ID. So this is going to query for this, provided it exists, and if it does not exist, to return a status code of 404. So after doing this, we would like to also get the data as it comes from the client. So I'll say data equals to request dot get JSON. Now after getting this, we shall just actually update this. So since we created our convenience class, when I go back to the models, you can see our convenience method, which is update, takes in a title and a description and then updates this. However, I forgot one really important thing, which is basically saving this, committing this transaction to our database. So I need to save this, and when I go back this side, I may just say recipe to update, then I'll just call dot update and then pass in our title. So our title is going to be data dot get. This is going to be data dot get title, and then the next is going to be data dot get. In this case, it's going to be the description. So if you're observant, this update method is simply coming from our models. We specify that this is going to update the current object, provided the title and the description. So let's go back to our main.py, and when you go back here, we can be able to also marshal this and return it as JSON. So to do that, I'm going to just come and return recipe to update. So I'm going to come and decorate this. So I'm going to come just right up here and then say at API dot marshal with, and then pass in the recipe model. And after this is done, let's go and try to take care of this. So I'm going to come and create a new request. So I'm going to create a new request. So this request is going to be to update a recipe. So this is going to be a put. So we need to specify our body as JSON. Now if you're observant, when you go to getting that recipe of ID1, we have milk, biscuits, and this. So we want to change this to something else. So let's say update a recipe. We're going to set the body as a JSON object. So we may say that the title is going to be equal to forgive me for this. So it's going to be beaver flavored yogurt. So something I had that is funny. So after this, let me first enlarge this. So I'm going to also add the description, and then we are going to add this and then say this is how to make it. So after doing this, I'm going to simply send this to our local host 8000 slash, so this is going to be slash recipe /1. And when we send this, see, we cannot connect to the server. So let's try to see server is running. So this is not actually, it's going to be 5000. So when I send, we see that it has been updated, and then we are getting the updated object. So when I try to query for this, so let me try to get this recipe of ID1. So in this case, it hasn't been yet updated. When we query for it, it has been updated with the new data. So our update is working. Let's go ahead and implement the delete route. So I'm going to come to our delete route, and then I'm going to come and first things first, query for that specific object. So I shall say recipe to delete is going to be equal to the same query that we've been using in the various routes. So then we are going to just delete this. So I will say recipe to delete dot delete, and then what we shall just actually return is the recipe to delete. Now I'm also going to just decorate this for now. So I'll just say at API dot, it's going to be marshal with recipe model. So after doing this, let me remove the pass statement and then save. This is going to restart. So now I close this and then go back to our insomnia. So in this case, we're creating a delete request. So I'm going to say delete recipe. So then this is going to be our delete request. So we need to create this, and then within here I'll say localhost. It's going to be 5000 slash recipe /1. So when I send this, it's going to return this, and when you try to query, so let's say we get our recipes, so this is going to return an empty list of recipes showing that it has deleted our recipe. So we have been able to see how to create a simple REST API that can be able to do the CRUD operations on our recipes. So let's go ahead and also view the Swagger documentation. So you need to go to our browser to localhost 5000/docs, and when we refresh, we see that our model has been created. So when I click on model, we see that our recipe model has been created, and then we can see the various fields that are on this recipe model. So you can also go ahead and see the various routes we've created. So within our default namespace, we have the different routes that we have been able to create. Now the next thing is going to be to protect our routes with JWT authentication, as well as to be able to create our login and sign up functionality. So I'm going to close this, head over back to our VS Code. So I'm going to use Flask JWT extended, which we already installed. So I forgot to do one thing. I'm going to pull out my terminal and stop the server. It's going to create a simple requirements.txt file, and then be able to keep track of the requirements that we're going to use. So I'm going to say pip freeze to requirements .txt file. So this is going to create this file, and when we look into this file, let me close this. So we are having the various dependencies for our project. So after doing this, the next thing is going to be to use Flask JWT JWT extended to create our login and sign up functionality. Basically our login and sign up functionality. So right now we are having a recipe model created. Now we shall also need a user model to help us to be able to create user accounts and stuff like that. So to do this, I'm going to go within our models. I'm going to create one extra model. I'm going to call this user. So this is going to be our user model, and then this user model is going to have these different fields. So I'm going to create a class of, so this is going to be a class of user, and then the user is going to have an ID, which is going to be an integer. It's going to also have a username, which is going to be a string, and then they will have an email. So an email is also going to be a string, and a password. So in this case, we are going to have a password that's going to also be a string. Now after this is done, we are going to create this model. So let's go ahead and implement it. So I'm going to come and say class. This is going to be our class of user, and it's going to inherit from db.model. So after doing this, the first field is the ID. So I'm going to say ID is going to be equal to db.integer, because it's going to be an integer, and then the primary key will be equal to true. So after setting this, we are going to create our username. So the username is going to be equal to db.string, and then we can set the nullable constraint to true, to false. I mean, we do not want it to be now. Now the next thing is going to be to set the email. So I'll say email is going to be db.this is going to be a string. So we can also specify the length of this string. So for the first case, I may say that we need a username of 25 characters, and then let's say the longest email can be 80 characters. So after doing this, I'll specify a password. Then this password is going to be db.. So I'll specify that this password is going to be just a text object, or it's going to be text varying size. Now after doing this, we'll create a convenience method that's going to help us to create a password for a user, or we may even ignore it and do it on the side of our route. So let's go ahead and try to implement this. So I'm going to come and just return a string representation of our object. So I'll say it's going to return an f string. So this is going to be an f string, and it's going to be user. So we shall just return the user with a username. So it's going to just return a user, and then the user is username. So this will be self.username. So one other thing that you may want is specify that a username is going to be unique. So we can say unique is going to be equal to true. And we may also say email. Let's have the username as the only attribute that's set to true, to unique. So when you save this, the next thing is going to be to create this model on our database without having to lose data. Now we're going to install Flask Migrate. That's going to help us to create this model onto our database without having to delete any table. So I need to go with my terminal, and within my virtual environment I'm going to say pip env install Flask Migrate. Now this is going to install Flask Migrate within our virtual environment. Now that Flask Migrate has been installed within our project, the next thing is going to be to create our migration repository. But before we do that, we are going to come within our main.py. So I'm going to close the terminal for now, and then make sure we instantiate Flask Migrate to work with our app. So I'm going to import the migrate class from Flask Migrate. So I'm going to come and say from Flask Migrate, I'm going to import the migrate class, and then create an instance of this migrate class, and then specify our app as well as our DB instance. So I'm going to come just down slightly below the DB init. So I'm going to come and say it's going to be migrate is going to be equal to the migrate class. So our instance is going to take in the app as well as the DB instance. Now after doing this, we are going to create our migration repository. So I'm going to pull up my terminal. So I'm on Linux, so I can run a command such as echo. So I can echo the Flask app, and then we can be able to see that our app has been specified as main.py. So this gives me access to commands such as Flask. Sorry for this. This is Flask shell, which brings a Python shell where I can run specific commands. Now, right here, I can be able to also run things like Flask DB. So when I run Flask DB, we see the different commands that we can run with Flask Migrate that can help us to do the various migration on our database. So we can see branches to show branch points, current to show the current revision or the current version of our database, to downgrade to a previous version, edit, and so on and so forth. So you need to create a migration repository that's going to contain a history of all the changes that we shall be doing to our database. So to do that, I'm going to come and say Flask DB init. Now this is going to create a migrations repository within our project. Now just like you see, we've created our migration folder here. Now when you check this folder, it has a versions folder that creates and has all the versions of the database, all the migrations that you create. Now in this case it's empty since we haven't yet created any migration. So we can go ahead and create our first migration. Now our first migration is going to be to create the user table in our database. So let's go ahead and try to do that. So we need to come within our terminal. Now after creating our migration repository, we are going to pull up the terminal and then say flask db migrate. So we can specify a reason for migrating. So we can say add user table, and after this we can run this command. So it's going to create this table and then create a migration for it. So just like you see here, we used SQL Alchemy Echo. So this is going to show us the different SQL commands that have been run. So we see the table Alembic version has been created, and then we see these different SQL Alchemy commands that have been run. So we see that our add user table has been created. So when you go to our migrations and check for the versions, we can see this version that has been created. So when I open this, we see we've created a user table, and these are the various SQL schema commands that will be run to create this in the database. So let me close this. Now to actually write this to our database, we are going to need to upgrade. So you need to come within our terminal. I'm going to clear this with Ctrl L and come and say flask db. So this is going to be upgrade. So the upgrade command just makes use of the current revision or the current version of the database. So in this case, the version that we have is the one that's within our version. So if we created another migration and then we said upgrade, it will just upgrade to that current version. So we need to say flask db upgrade, and this is going to basically create this table onto our database. Now keep in mind that at first we only had the recipe model. Now in this case we've created our user table. Now after doing this, I'm going to close that. Then I'm going to try to investigate the tables we've created onto our database. So I'm using a tool called DB Browser for SQLite. It's going to help us to see the various data that we store in our database. So I'm going to open up the file. So I'm going to come to my coding folder and then come and open up that folder. So let's see where this is. So it's Flask React project. So I'm going to come and open this up. Let's try to see where this is. So it's in here. So I'm going to go to the backend and then open our database. So when you open our database, you see that 3 tables have been created. So we have our Alembic version table, our recipe table, our user table, and the various fields that have been created. So here we have the version number. We have on the recipes we have the various, just like we described them in the model. Now we can also have a user with a username, email, and password, and then that has shown us how we can migrate those changes without having any loss of data. So the next thing is going to be to implement a sign up and a login route on our API, so as we can be able to authenticate users as well as to give them JWTs.